Welcome to Voice Note Me, a lo-fi podcast sharing beauty, one human at a time, through conversations unfolding in solitude, in other words, through voice notes. I'm Robin Bethel, a writer, a lover of voice notes, and your host. Thanks for joining me.
Rainy days don't seem so wet. Stormy nights don't stay.
In this episode, I exchanged voice notes with Christian Winn, a beautiful poet and fiction writer. Also, my ex-boyfriend. We've shared a wild and destined ride of evolving love, and some poems came out of it. Here we share some of those and also reflect on poetry more widely, how it nestles into us and how we nestle into it. I loved this conversation, and I hope you enjoy listening. Hi, Christian. So I just left seeing you for coffee about an hour ago, and here is my voice note to you. I think for this first one, I will kind of introduce who you are to me and then hand it over to you to modulate, shift, add whatever you want to add. This Voice Note Me episode is really like tapping into a really intimate space in my life because you are my ex-boyfriend, and I will also just put out there, I think of you as a karmic soulmate and one of the deepest loves that I have had in my life, and one that brought really deep soul movements in letting go and just beauty threaded throughout in a lot of ways. And so we talked a while ago. I had another idea to start another podcast where I had people read pieces of their journals or things that they were creating. And, maybe I'm still going to do that, or maybe I'm just going to bring that into Voice Note Me. But we were going to do an episode where we each shared some poems written about the other or around the other, more directly from my side, more with a creative angle of approach, or through more of a lens, perhaps sometimes from your side. And then I didn't feel the call to get that started yet. And today at coffee, we talked about maybe just doing a Voice Note Me and bringing some pieces into that. So here we are, a Voice Note Me with my ex-boyfriend, who I love so much still. And I know you love me so much too. And today we talked a lot about poetry and a lot about your poetry. And I think, I don't know, maybe after we share a couple of things, maybe we'll just kind of work our way back to poetry at large, because I feel so much around that space for me, so much around that space for you. And I did say once I could have fallen in love with you based on you as poet alone. And that's not what happened. It was more than that. But, you are a beautiful poet in the world. And so maybe we'll meander our way back to that. But for now, that's kind of just my introduction of you in this space. Of course, you're a poet, you're a writer, you are a producer of literary events, you're the founder and director of Story Fort in the community where we live for a long time, and you've been a teacher of creative writing, and now you write fiction and poetry every day. And gosh, I think there's going to be like so much more rising in the world around this heartbeat of art and like the gift you can give in that space through your own work and through some other things. And maybe we'll talk about that later. But either way, that's what I'm going to begin with. And then just going to ask you to, introduce yourself and what you're doing here in this Voice Note Me with me as you like to. And then after that, then we can read a few things.
Hi, Robin. I just wanted to send you a voice message this morning. It is Saturday. The sun is out, and I'm getting ready to head off the grid to do a lot of writing, to do a lot of decompressing from the madness of the world. But I wanted to let you know that I appreciate your voice message, and I look forward to discussing more. My name's Christian Winn, and I am, as Robin expressed in her voice note, someone who's been very close to Robin for a long time, as a romantic partner, as a friend, as a fellow writer, and just, I don't know, a soulmate of sorts, I would say. And yeah, so Robin, I just want, I guess, the people to know that I'm a fiction writer, I'm a poet. I am a sometimes journalist. I am a sometimes podcast person. I am somebody who enjoys traveling the West and actually really anywhere, but I primarily consider myself to be sort of an aficionado of the American West these days. And yes, I'm heading out into the further west of Idaho, up in the mountains here in a few minutes. And I wanted to leave this message for you to consider as I am gone off grid. And I look forward to being back on grid after some decompression and some experiences up there in the backcountry of Idaho. And I care for Robin a great deal, and I love the fact that she is doing all this cool work in the podcast realm. And I just want to say, ask me some questions. I'm here to answer them. I'm here to read some poems. I hope that Robin is going to as well. Maybe some fiction. Who knows? We're going to share some creative work as we've done in our lives since we connected a few years back. And I wanted to say thanks for having me on the show. All right, Robin, more later. Take care.
Hi, Christian. I hope you had a lovely drive out into the backcountry. And I will send this note. I'm not sure if you'll receive it while you're out there or later, but I think I'm just going to drop right into what I was planning to share in our sharing a few poems about the other or about us or around it, weaving in. I know your approach to doing that is your own, so maybe you can speak to that later if you want to. I'm sitting here in my room with kitten patter around the room, so I'm not sure if you can hear that or not, but the kittens are playing and I have some poems open. It's kind of funny because in the arc of time where we were really involved in that certain way, I wrote most poems after one ending before we were even fully together, and it was still deep suffering. And that's when, I don't know, circumstances just were exactly what made me want to write poems. It felt like the place to direct certain things for a couple of days. And now I'll share this one, a grouping of some smaller poems. It is a series of letting go, November 9th to 10th, 2023. For my own reference, I suppose. 1. Letting go. Open into the delicacy. Let chiaroscuro shift, slowly, softly. Not of beloved light and dark, but beloved him and him. Past and present, present and future. Breathe into errant movements of fingers and heart that also breathe the circles of balance, imbalance. Accept the shape, receive the subtle caress. 2. Addendum. We say we were baptized in lightning, but that's really just the start. That first night they chased us, those bolts, yet left soul and skin unsinged. We said yes, faiths moved. We thought the baptismal font had its moment, but the truth is, one hot flash tangled in my red string bracelet which means things you don't even know, and I brought it to your bed where you tangled it all through my hair. With the friction of your hands, it sparked flame at my roots, between your fingers. Then October, it really burned then. But the biggest spectacle was saved for the end, when we walked away, holding on, in new directions, and heart gusts of air blew the flame to lit cradle that burned me whole, finishing what lightning began, what lightning had always asked and promised. And I cried, and my jagged exhales fed the gifted love pyre at my feet, more sweet, willing breath. 3. This spinning quiet. When I say it's quiet, I don't mean it's steady. A subtlety of waves still holds movement, and I am here, and I am there. I cry at the dead mouse, and I turn to you, because you love me so fucking much, and the angry edge in your voice that day calls back to me. I cry at the immensity of being asked to love you so hard and then let you go, and I write a poem, this one, now 14. I know being with you would birth many poems. I see the sliding door path, and I know now it's time to return to this quiet. 4. One thing I never expected to learn. Love triangles are not for the faint-hearted, especially when made of a poet, a mystic, a ghost. 5. Important to add. In much of my crying, I feel this over the rainbow too. This line, thank you, my fate. 6. One more thing. Enough talk for now of being burned at the stake, because this begins and ends with gift. A gift so large for you, it helps me breathe. A gift so large for me, it takes my breath again. And gift so large to share, embedded love that grows through all shapes. And that, with my smile at your smile as I burn, is the note to carry us back into letting go. And that is what I will share. So I hadn't really felt a call to write many poems before this. I wrote a couple in playful moment and spirit for someone a few years before this, and then, gosh, maybe another one in there. And then this was the first time I really felt an emotional pull to do that. And there is a stream of them, and these were some of those. Then, after a little bit of time, we let go of the letting go, and we're together. And then had a series of deaths after that, too. And those ones I did not write poems about. I got my poeming out in the beginning and then just moved through the deaths in other ways. So that is what I want to share. And now I just hand it over to you to share whatever you want to share poem-wise, which I think probably came about at a later date than these. So over to you, Mr. Christian Winn.
Hi there, Robin. This is Christian coming back at you. Almost 2 weeks later, as I've been in the backwoods and had a great trip. Did a lot of writing, a lot of hiking, a lot of just looking at the autumn beauty here in the mountains of Idaho. It was incredible. And now I'm actually up in the mountains again at a very cool writing residency, shorter one, but very awesome nonetheless, in Ketchum, Idaho, one of my favorite spots on Earth. The five mountain ranges kind of collide here, if you will, and just have a view of the Pioneers and the Rockies and the Smokies from here. I believe from where where I'm sitting right now, I can see all three of those. But it's pretty wonderful, and I am enjoying that so very much. And I'm going to read some poems. I really appreciate what you sent over got me a little teary, as might be expected. And just, I wrote a lot of poems, coming from a similar place that you were talking about. I do write, for those who are listening, I write a lot of poems, maybe too many, who knows? But it's one of my favorite things to do in the world, and try to produce something every day. And been doing that since, I don't know, for many years now. So I have a lot. And what I do with my work, oftentimes, like in regard to this project, this podcast, just to explain myself a little bit, I kind of coalesce, kind of like the five mountain ranges here. A lot of life experience, and I provide a lot of fiction as well. So I kind of fictionalize elements of things that are going on. I do write directly, as you'll hear in some of these poems, about particular people, but oftentimes it's more of an amalgam. But definitely, I wrote a lot of poems, both Robin and I were together as a couple, but as friends as well. Things were influenced by just my caring and love for Robin, and it's still there. And I've written a couple of newer ones, kind of in when we first started talking about sharing in this regard, back in mid-July, I believe, or even early July. But this is just a smattering of some of those, and give you a sense of kind of my voice and just kind of where I'm coming from with. I have a narrative sense of storytelling, and also just hopefully an imaginative use of kind of esoteric language to get to emotions. So this first one is pretty straightforward. I wrote a series of these, but I'm just going to read this one. When I was in San Diego, and we were corresponding via voice note sometimes on the phone, sometimes email. But this one's just called Dear Robin. Dear Robin, it's drizzle and traffic blurt and pastries down Adams Avenue this afternoon, and I'm writing about birds and rabbits and daughters and deathbed mothers, and then all this to you. The streets are slow, and the city seems unsure of what to do when the sun is not shining. But we're all getting by with some dark roast and heavy cream and ham and provolone paninis, while the big boy fathers, in flip flops by their big boy sons, Italian chocolate cookies, and speak about how everything has been turned inside out, how the sky is not the sky on Wednesdays like this, how the young mothers are all out traveling Midwest on business, somewhere colder in black stockings and slingback mules. And it might be snowing where they are by nightfall, but here the moon is waiting above the stucco churchyards, very ready to show itself through the door and say hello to you and me and whoever else might take notice. So that was Dear Robin. And this one comes from a series of works I've been generating, I guess, during the time I was with Robin, in that capacity, as a couple, but also just around our relationship in general as friends and people. It's called I Always Meant to Ask You. I always meant to ask you for permission to make the very most of failure and love and blood sport and all those tall cups of white liquor down 8th Street on Sunday nights when we still had a grip or two of folding money and 8 cigarettes left in our canvas backpacks and a lot of sad, brave notions about how to save the world on Monday afternoons like this from people like us, trembling in the margins and the seams of the criminally insane, and everything was sulfur and cinnamon and the salt of tired skin running across our tongues and into our hearts like field mice. And you know I miss you more than the in-jokes, and more than the black magic of want, and more than the laughter of those songbirds we always tried to count on our fingers and toes, as if we might ever speak a language like all those languages floating in the last light of the last days we ever got to lean our shoulders into each other like the tired, tired boys and girls we were already becoming. This one is called I Told You. I told you I was some one brand of lovely enough to love, but I was foolish. I was tart. I was a worn down version of a boy, and I am sorry I never made good on the big words I tried so hard to pronounce and untangle and make a pretty little shape of and lay at your pale, freckled feet, sweet girl. This one's called There Were Always Too Many. There were always too many other boys and girls and rhyme schemes trembling that tight white air between our chests at dawn, with the birdsong leveling up and the sugar cubes all dissolving in the kitchen sink downstairs. There were always those road trips to Otter Rock and Manzanita and those high mountain lakes in Idaho we never quite got to live within. There was always too much blood in our throats and down our spines in the mornings and afternoons, and often at early dusk in July. And for the life of us, we simply could not tell any of you sad, proud witnesses just where that blood all came from in the first place. So there we go. There is a lot of blood here, it seems like. It's a theme. Blood and skin and freckles and maybe some white liquor here and there. But this one, I'll just read a couple more. And I'm scrolling through trying to figure out which ones those will be. And we'll try this one here. This is called We Were Without User Manuals. We were without user manuals or straight teeth or a good tired bit of knowledge about how refrigeration works or just what a catamount might be or who killed Roger Rabbit or how many dead poets a society makes. And we were sometimes afraid of mice and side pieces and the black, black hours of a Tuesday night as we lay hip to hip, not knowing who we both were maybe thinking of understanding better right then. And we were almost brave enough to lose the Cold War and almost old enough to swallow swords. And perhaps in the end of every new version of the end, we thought maybe we could finally bleed blue for each other because the best right reasons for all that love we always had seemed to be a run of bright, pretty bruises across our shoulders and necks to touch and trace with marvel and glee and a small sense of higher purpose we tried so hard to understand. And just two more short ones here. I'm trying to figure out which ones. There are lots, like I mentioned, and I really appreciate being able to share some of this with y'all and with Robin, who's not, I don't believe, or read any of these. Maybe the Dear Robin one, but all right. I lied. Three short ones to finish off here. It turns out, it turns out no one gets out of the fire, not even us, arm in arm and mouth to mouth. Nobody remembers the smell of our breath against the top sheets and the window smudge and the loud ringing behind our eyes and tongues and pretty sun-blonde skin. You always remembered. You always remembered to ask me the very saddest questions with the very sweetest mouth, and everything I answered was half-masked and holy with want and joy, and even some days wonder. I was a colloquy and a sweet dereliction made of mud, and all those freckles I stole from the girls we watched giving themselves away down 6th Street. We'll finish with this one. We had the bone structure. We had the bone structure of queens and boy bands, and that seemed enough to build a life upon for a good long run of hours and fortnights and hectares of weeks. And I loved us for that kind of polyglot whist, and I loved us for our matching scars in late summer, and I loved us for how many wishes we had left in a lantern there for a while, a short and eternal little while. And that's where I'll finish. So thanks for having me. And there's more. If you want to hear more Christian Winn stuff, you can always just ask. All right. Take care. Be well.
I'm recording this lying on my bed with Kaifi next to me, and she just started purring as soon as I started recording. So I think I'm going to keep going and just let that be a little bit of a song rumbling in the background. I just listened to your poems, and thank you so much for sending them. Yeah, I've heard the Dear Robin. You shared a couple of those back at that time when you were writing them, and I haven't heard any of the others, which is unsurprising considering that you write so many poems and it's your space for being with your feelings about things that didn't need to be probably brought forward every minute. And also because I once told you that I didn't like being brought into your poems in the way that you did, where it was me and fictionalized strands and fictionalized aspects of person and maybe other people brought into, and it was strange for me. And so I could see how, I loved reading your poems, but that was a bit weird for me in those instances. So it makes sense I haven't read more centering on that with strands of me-ness or usness. But I was glad to listen to them now, and I feel like now I can hear that. I can hear a fictionalized look at us and notes of me that are not fully me or fully us, and just appreciate hearing it and that being your style as a poet and seeing the beauty in that. And I can feel notes in the poems that you shared that I recognize, along with notes that I don't, and letting it be its own mysterious swirl. So thank you. I was thinking yesterday, as I've now started opening into writing more poetry and kind of a surprise emergence that I felt and sort of activation in a way that's so different from how I have before. And yesterday I wondered if that would have been as near, if it would have been something that then could have dropped in without having had that flurry of writing poems around us that fell in a couple years before. And I don't know. I mean, it's all a perfect heap of things, but it was a note where then I felt thankful, and it felt like you were a piece of my opening into writing more poetry, obviously at that one time, but now later, kind of connecting back to that in a way that ultimately I feel like I was meant to meander to, a way that's not really about writing poems, just centered on a person or to a person, because a number of them I wrote like a flurry in pain, and then I would just write them casually, as little gifts to you, ones that, I wouldn't read now. But instead of just offerings to a person or what I would say in a moment where I was otherwise holding a bit of a quiet, now it really feels like it's meant to flow in a different direction. And I kind of lost the thread of what I was saying, but I think the thread is just that I was kind of reflecting on the thread and thankful for the flurry that you inspired in my writing before. So different from where I find myself now, but also really connected. And thank you. Do you want to talk at all a little bit about how you feel about poetry generally, or anything like that? Or should we just leave it here with sharing these? I'll let you decide.
Hi, Robin. This is Christian once again. And here I am because I did want to keep the conversation going about this poetry thing we're talking about, like how those kind of add up. It's a strange logic, strange story, interesting narratives that'll add something to my own life in a way that I know it does yours in its own particular way. But yeah, the poetry we're both drawn to very much. And really, I appreciate your words about the work I sent over to you, or just the audio of it at least. And there were a lot to choose from, as mentioned, and just went with those for now. But we can probably get some more your way here down the line. I always like to share, but it is a little strange for me to like write in this way that was not really I mean, it was a little strange. I mean, he didn't feel very comfortable almost with me kind of fictionalizing or kind of making an amalgam of some of the experiences we had and continue to have, or just, memories of that. So it is a different style, I guess, and some I just have a harder time, like, not or kind of writing directly to somebody, but or even about one particular event sometimes. But I think the ones I read you are pretty close to like the essence of what a lot of things that we did and went through, and just all the good stuff and hard stuff. But that said, my thoughts on poetry. I mean, I've been a poet. I mean, I like in second or third grade, I published a poem like in the local newspaper down in the Bay Area in California. And just as a side note, I decided to record this down at Camel's Back Park. It's a beautiful fall day in Boise. You probably hear the screaming of children in the background, and then just maybe a little traffic, but hopefully that only enhances the poetry. It's a pretty great place to sit and write, which I just wrote a poem. We're sitting right here, park bench. Um, anyway, that said, I mean, as far as I did publish a poem, like my mom, I think, sent it into the newspaper when I was a little guy. And really into like junior high, I would write poetry. We had a little literary journal at the junior high I went to in middle school, and I wrote a poem called The Baseball Hall of Fame. And it was published in there, and a couple of other ones. There's sort of rhyming poems back then. It's like seventh and eighth grade, ninth grade. But then in high school, I was a pretty sporty kid, but I did end up writing some poems along the way as well. One about our golf teams, which was kind of humorous, at least it was at the time. I don't even know if I have a copy of that. But I did continue to write a lot more heading into undergrad, where I went to school in Seattle. And I just really was enthralled by, I don't know, just the logic of poetry for me. It adds up, it makes sense. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to be a fan of everybody's poems or get a lot out of everybody's poems, but so many that kind of like intrinsic logic that is hard to really, I don't know, put a finger on. It took take in grad school. It took some poetry workshops, even though I was studying my MFA and getting it in fiction primarily, but I did take a number of poetry courses, and that was great, these workshops. But it's so hard to kind of figure out, outside of the very obvious stuff, like how a poem even works sometimes, or giving advice to somebody in a workshop setting. And I guess for me, it's like the way my brain and spirit work are just kind of in this esoteric, kind of strange sort of like just kind of let what comes from the inside get out onto the page and kind of then make sense of it and reconstruct it. And it just, I write a lot of fiction as well, but I find myself producing it's a ton of poetry. Especially I've been traveling a lot this particular year, last couple years, and sometimes that shorter form is easier for me to keep progressing on a work. And so I have like 3 or 4 books, poetry notice for the last couple of years. I don't know what, I've been publishing some of the poems, but I haven't really put them out as a book. So I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to try to find a home for some of the stuff. But that said, it makes sense to me. I was listening to Ada Limon, who is a great poet. I know you love very much, Robin, and she was on NPR the other day. And she just like, now that she's not poet laureate of the United States because her term has ended, which she loved, sounds like, but now she's kind of back into her own kind of skin as a poet and spirit as a poet. She said, kind of, she can be weirder. She doesn't face the public. She's just in her own little place. And I like that weirdness and accessing that, just seeing what flies, and just what comes out and just kind of connective words and sounds and rhythms and just kind of it makes sense to me. And somebody like Dennis Johnson is one of my favorites. It's strange and narrative as well. Diane Seuss is one of my favorites as well. Is one that appeals to her a couple times, and her logic around kind of some narrative poems in her book Frank, especially, which I love. Anyway, there's a lot of those poets out there. I know you know many of them probably more than I do, for sure. But I just feel like I write poetry because I kind of need to. And I mean, I feel it's sort of the same, well, very much the same way about fiction and storytelling. And that, is something intrinsically I just feel like I need to do. But poetry almost is just like this instinct and it just kind of comes out. So I'll just leave it at that. And this the way I construct most of my poems these days and over the last few years, many years really, is like I write them down freehand in a journal almost always. Sometimes I'll type some poems into the computer, but and then it's more like a don't know, just a stream of consciousness to see what comes out. I kind of work around a theme more these last couple of years, especially with the idea of a few books being sort of one called Proletariat Love Stories, there's one called Stories About Girls by Boys, there's one called Heliotropes Explained. Just like titles that I write around. And this one right now is like the history of when. This was kind of a whole series, like the history of when this happened and this happened and this happened. But that kind of helps drive kind of a focus, I guess, of sorts into my poetry. So it's not just all weird and random, but there's still plenty of that in there. So I know I'm curious, for you to answer a couple of those questions too about like what you were asking me about why you're drawn to poetry. I mean, you read and sounds like you're writing a lot more recently, but you've been a reader of poetry for years and have a great voice and a great presentation. And it's a pleasure to hear you when you do read either to me directly or just you have this on your podcasts or you put stuff out online. So yeah, what do you get out of poetry, Robin? I'm curious. It makes me feel better just to both create it and also to take it in and from another writer and just kind of like I don't know, fill kind of an empty spot in one of the chambers of my heart, perhaps. I don't know. I love it. And it's not an easy form sometimes to understand exactly what the writers, where they're coming from, but that's okay. Sometimes not knowing for me, it's just fine. You get a vibe, you get a feel. I don't particularly love, poetry that's too didactic or kind of too, I guess, just trying to tell you how to feel about the world. I like it to be a little bit more esoteric. So that said, it's been fun just to talk about all this stuff and to share some poems. And I think for the next, maybe it might be the final, I think it would be kind of cool to have us read a poem from somebody we really admire and then maybe read one more of ours to kind of wrap up things for this particular podcast episode. But this is great. Thank you so much for having me. And that's what I have for now. Take care. Farewell from Camel's Back Park on 13th Street in Boise, Idaho.
Hey, Christian. Thank you for all of your thoughts there. I remember you telling me about the poem in elementary school, and I think it's lovely you've been in poem life for so long. From that, and also sometimes how you approach poetry, I feel like my answer to all of that is almost the inverse in many ways. I wasn't very interested in poetry as a kid, and I don't think I really was until I went back to school to finish my bachelor's when I was 26. I think right after I got married, and I'd had really profound experience that I now think of as like a total dissolution and reconstruction, and brought me to a different state of consciousness and way of seeing. And right at that time, because of that, I was really centered on the idea of beauty, like capital B beauty, not like how we do our hair or what we look like, although there is beauty in what we can see too. But it was more the idea of inherent beauty in everything, beauty in the midst of imperfection, holding together the light and the dark. And this was really what I was present with a lot then. And at that same time, then I took a class that dove into the Romantic poets, and they connected with me so much. And they wrote about beauty a lot. And beyond that, they also, would write little essays about poetry and the poet. And there's one from Percy Shelley that I have still in this Norton anthology, and I got it down for myself. And I underlined so much, but one sentence I'll share when he's talking about poetry is, "It reproduces the common universe of which we are portions and percipients, and it purges from our inward sight the film of familiarity which obscures from us the wonder of our being." He also talked about the poet, capital P poet, of course, as prophet. And I hadn't actually really read of anyone else or knew anyone else at that time in my life whose way of seeing was aligned with this way of seeing that I was then holding. And I saw it in the Romantic poets. And so they became meaningful to me, and I started being more interested in poetry then. And then by the time I was about 33 and a mom of a 2-year-old and didn't have a lot of time to myself, also having gone through kind of more inner experience openings and things, to where I think at that time then I was kind of opening more into non-duality. And I think then was when I had my first kind of like spontaneous meditative state, which I feel is like opening into the fullness, kind of like the melty everythingness in like a almost like a sensory, but like beyond 6 senses sort of thing. And so I was just very much attuned to the fullness, the all the thingsness, and also didn't have very big pockets of time anymore. And so at that point, by the time my son was about 2 and I was 33, I was reading a lot of poetry. And I'd always loved reading fiction before that in my life, and I just started to not really be as interested in that. And a lot of the poets that spoke to me were poets who really did touch into the beauty, and the beauty to me being anything that's like looking at the fullness of anything, like holding all of that. And like in that quote that I read, removing a film of familiarity that obscures the wonder of our being. And so I was really drawn to poets who just are very near their inner world and write of that in a really intimate way. Spiritual poets, because that is one of the biggest pieces of aliveness that I feel in my life. So mystical poets, Rumi and Rilke and Mary Oliver, David White, Dorothy Walters. And I was just finding so many beautiful poets. And I'm not very interested in poetry as like intellectual literary exercise. It's more like, here is a glimpse of soul. And so the poems that I would read, I felt like they were so nourishing and beautiful. And I could read one page and that would be more nourishing than reading, like a 300-page novel. And so my attention really shifted by then, and I started reading poetry most of all. And then in 2019, I wrote one just for a person to express something. And then with you, there were those poems. And it was kind of this thing like where the desire to write poetry myself was never a big one, even though I was so infatuated with poetry and feel into life as poem and feel inner world as poem, as just like a collection of all the textures all hanging together in perfect tension and suspension, and so yeah, it was really just recently where I felt like I was supposed to write more poetry. It was with the passing of Andrea Gibson. I kind of had that realization. Before that, I felt like I was called to write fiction, and that's still something that I'm working on, and, screenplay, but I realized I was supposed to write more poems, and it feels like just an extension of so much, where something that I've done in the past is just kind of like an offering of love to a person, now something that I meant to share more widely, which is also how I feel. It's not like the more artisty perspective, but I don't, as a writer, whether it's poetry or fiction before, I've never felt like I have to write in order to make sense of my world or my feelings or figure out what I think or anything like that. I feel like I integrate my life more in stillness and quiet and just like letting it all sift and sort and find its place and form, and then it kind of alchemizes and then it spills out as love, is what I hope and what I have felt. And usually that love is in like the loves I can touch. but to me, art is just like another means of that. I feel called to create art because I feel like it's part of how I'm meant to be loved in the world. And so I feel like I've had a really long time in kind of this gestation, this inner fountain where I bring so much attention to my inner experience and allowing it to alchemize and being so present with it. And so when I'm called to create art, for me, it feels like I am doing it as just this other means of expressing something that's meant to be love in the world. So often that is like sharing vision or voice or something I feel like I'm meant to share, like a way of seeing. Or even now I'm feeling sometimes too more like just more little places to kind of just share, almost like just a vibration of being, and just offer it to meet or touch whoever it's meant to, however it's meant to, with not a lot of ego or expectation attached to it. And writing poetry just feels like part of that mix now for me. But I love poetry so much, and I love sharing poetry. I love reading poems that I love for others to hear. And the tricky thing with podcasts is I can't just read all the poems. It has to be something that is in the public domain. So that really does shift what I can share. I think it's got to be now before like 1926. I think it would be. I mean, I love a lot of poetry from before then, but then it's all translated. So then technically the translation needs to be from before then too. So, I mean, I feel like with the translation, sometimes I'm a little bit more freewheeling, but yeah, poetry is beauty. I love it so much. And to me, the poetry of life is just a holding together of all the textures, all the things in perfect, balanced imbalance. And the poems I love most do that. I love poems where it's also like its heartbeat is aligned with my heartbeat in ways. And so I think the poem I'm going to read, because you mentioned wanting to end with something like that, is a Rumi poem. So we're well before 1926. I have no idea what translation this is because it's just on a canvas leaning against my wall. And that is because I am so happy being didactic, and I hope that it tells my son exactly how he should approach his inner life. So, okay, this is The Guest House by Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight, the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. From Rumi. The name of one of my cats, like Kaifi, who I think I mentioned without saying who that was, and also, of course, K-pop demon hunter extraordinaire and beautiful poet. I have that on a canvas because I feel like it's a good example for my son, for Gabe, because I just lived that way anyways. So I figure having something on the wall that's not just me suggesting this way of opening into life and emotion and inner experience is maybe helpful, a good way to go. So, okay, that's the poem that I will share. And if you want to share one more of our own too, I'm going to pause this and go grab that. Okay, so this other little poem, I don't know why I'm reading this one. It's kind of funny to read, kind of quirky. But I wrote this in 2023, I think before I had my little flurry of writing through the pain of one of our endings. The first ending, I think it was before that, just in the spring. And I guess I'm reading it because it asks a question, and the answer is, well, we'll see. Okay, here it is. What would poems of mine look like when I don't write poems but live them, wrapped in silent gossamer gold? Heart musings pulled apart, entered slow. Single strands spun soft from whole sea. Small notes struck swift, then set free. So I guess we'll keep seeing what it looks like, and we'll let it all fall where it may, and you will keep writing all the poems, and we'll see how they meet the world. I'm really excited to see what form that collision takes, and lots of possibilities there for sure, which we didn't really talk about, but I love your orientation to the world through writing poems. And thanks for talking about that with me on Voice Note Me and sharing poems that are kind of written about me ish in your way, and my sharing some. It was an interesting idea to do, and I know you're a really private person, so thanks for joining me with that adventure. And I now leave you to any last words, last poems you want to share.
Hello, Robin. Once again, we're back, and thank you so very much for your response to my response, and my previous response to your previous response. And all this has been a really cool experience back and forth. I'm really glad we decided to do this and you asked me to. And it's been great to share work, both that we've written, and now I'll share something from a writer I really admire. And you shared one from Rumi, which was fantastic, and I really enjoyed that. And I guess it was really cool to hear. I know we talked about poetry a lot and writing a lot and art and appreciation for this practice that we're involved in, and as both readers and writers, and just people who understand the greater meaning, I guess, are really into the greater meaning of poetry in this world. You had some really beautiful things to say. Just that idea that poetry is beauty. It also just holds so much meaning and does things that we don't even know it's doing to us until it's done. And it's really wonderful. So this has been a great experience, is what I want to say. And I guess, I don't know, I just have so many great memories of sharing poems with you, and also just like digging through poems on the floor of my condo and just going through all that stuff and just putting them in different stacks and discussing them and reading them. And also just considering, starting a press, considering, getting books out into the world that we have written, I have written, you have written, and other people have too. And also just the idea of like the meaning of not just poetry, but story and narrative, and just connectivity through the good words. So this has all been a wonderful experience, and I just think I'll say I'm going to keep writing these poems. I may share one of mine here to close out, but I'm not totally sure yet. I'm in between. Because I want to share one of our friend Josh Booten from his awesome collection called The Union of Geometry and Ash. We've talked about him before a lot, but he is someone I really admire. Just one of my favorite contemporary poets, and his work is not in the public domain yet, but you have garnered permission from him. I think you had him on this very podcast right here, or at least one of your other podcasts. So I'm going to read just a short piece of his called A Piece of Paper on the Interstate. And it just does these things, very everyday life stuff that I just love. It's like he just nails these little tiny details of ordinary life, but kind of blends them with kind of a profound beauty, and just kind of this, once again, a connectivity between people and hopes and dreams and loves. And this one of my favorites. Thought I'd just let you guys get a taste of it. And if you haven't picked up the book yet, I would highly recommend it. Mr. Josh Booten, A Piece of Paper on the Interstate. Something wounded in the way it flutters and dives, revealing the wake of 18-wheelers with one wide arc that reminds me of a deaf girl's hands, the sign for evening, which is almost here. The traffic slowing so we can taper ourselves into the tunnel that leads toward night. or the way the paper turns now, alternating front to back, the sign for tree, as leaves in the wind, a single sheet dreaming itself back into the forest. It's probably nothing but a grocery list, phone number no longer needed, though I hope a little. It's a love letter addressed to the inmate crew who will clean the roadside later this week, an SOS from the young widow 7 cars ahead. I'd go to her now, wade with her through this momentary ocean of cars, carry her as we both are carried toward whatever shore will take us, the tiny island of her bed, where I tuck her snugly beneath a paper white sheet. Or maybe we just hold each other, practicing the mild origami that intimacy is, overlapping ourselves until her despair means my keys on the side table, my longing the arches of her feet, until her soft sobs turn to car horns and traffic picks up again. And I remember she doesn't exist. Only this piece of paper that touches a moment, the ground, then is gone. There you have it, a piece of paper on the interstate, just something so small, so beautiful and storied and made into something larger. And I just think that he's speaking to the idea of creation in that poem, as far as it's just this piece of paper, but then some words get written down on this piece of paper. It's his piece of paper, that is my piece of paper, that is your piece of paper, Robin. And it comes to life and it tells the world and ourselves a little bit about the world and ourselves. And I feel like the best poems, the ones that at least I'm drawn to the most, really do. I just love the reference to the inmate crew cleaning the roadside, and just an idea of just this island of her bed that he might go to her if possible as he kind of dreams her up. There are so many wonderful artists we could keep mentioning, I could keep mentioning, but I just think it's been a pleasure and an honor to be on this podcast with you, Robin. And thank you so much for having me. And I guess we'll just keep writing the good words as best we can and sharing them as best we can. And I did want to share one of mine, perhaps, but I think I'm just going to let Booten have the last word. I guess I don't really know what else I have for you, Robin, right now, but we can keep talking about this poetry stuff, hopefully for many, many years, maybe like all the years that we have left, that the world has left. Appreciate you, and I appreciate being on here. So that's what I have. Goodbye for now, and take care out there.
Thanks for that one, Christian, by Josh Booten. Our poetic tastes are really different, but we both love him so much. He holds the space that we both love. So he's our shared poet love. He was just on Sacred Conversations, which is the other podcast that I have with Nicole Dolan, and we bring people on and have conversations in real time. And he read that one along with a few others, and that episode's actually going to be coming out probably in a week or so. He's so lovely, and I think that's a beautiful closing note to end us on. Love that you mentioned the possibility of the press as well. I hope that you do that one day, and I think it would be beautiful. It also felt beautiful to have you join me here, Christian, so thank you. Just like our taste in poetry, what we kind of gravitate towards is often different. Some of how we hold poetry is quite different too, but yet we both hold it so deeply and we both love it so much, and it's just so near both of us in our lives. And it was nice to share poems here with you that represent large hurricanes of time in our lives, and also just talk about poetry more generally. I love bringing poetry just into more spaces. I remember you mentioned poems on the floor or poetry on the floor, and yeah, that was, to anyone listening, a while ago, Christian printed out all of his poetry, or not all, but hundreds of pages of poetry, and we would just sift through it on the floor and kind of organize and go through. And I think we talked about having a poetry on the floor podcast, actually. But I think I definitely want to bring in more poetry on the different things that I'm putting out in the world and have more people come on and share their poetry. So what a wonderful way to start that by doing this with you. It feels like a piece of art in this piece of living history. And here is to all the poetry to come for each of us. Thanks for joining me here. If you enjoyed this conversation via voice notes, I hope you follow the show and come back. And I hope you keep opening into more and more beauty in this world, sometimes easy to see, sometimes harder to discern. It's everywhere through all the mess and all the discord. Let's love our way into seeing it.
From the moment that we met, you were worth the wait. Oh, this could be the best thing